The dive team is in their vehicles looking for an electric ray. These are real and there are several different ones. I've never gotten a good look at one, but when we were in Catalina in 2017 doing fish counts with the reef organization, we saw several of them in transit. Which is to say, they saw us coming a mile away and went scooting across the sand flats faster than we could, so we had to settle for glimpses of them and the sand trails they left behind them. Going by the trails, these guys were about this big. Our team is looking for one much bigger than that.
There he is!
Wow, what a specimen!
Be careful. He can give quite a jolt.
Much bigger. They haven't noticed that someone else is in the area.
Make sure those connections are tight. Signal as soon as that drill hole is finished.
These guys are planting charges and setting them off.
In you go, fella.
Got him!
Okay, surface, here we go. Shockwave!
Hal! Hal, are you all right?
He doesn't look all right. Those explosions knocked him a little off balance and he touched the ray. They produce electric shocks all over their bodies, and those bodies are more adapted to handling such shocks than Hal's body is. They have to get him into a vehicle and back to Sealab. At least they hung on to the ray.
You're okay, Hal. Just don't play anymore with electric rays.
Thanks, Dr. James. If we had enough of them, we could power Sealab.
Not a bad idea. Now look here, Hal. The purpose of our experiment is to try to discover just how nature makes electricity.
I'm afraid I have to inform you that you are currently duplicating experiments and research that has been going on since 1770. 200 years. By 1972, when this was made, we knew where their electricity producing organs are, how they extend their influence to the creature's entire body, and the biochemical processes that produce the actual zap. I think Paul is a little behind on his reading. He's amazed that he can light a light bulb by connecting it to the ray. This is our leader. While he's all goggle-eyed like a 10-year-old, Ed and Gail have gone back out to see who's blowing stuff up in their front yard.
Somebody's been planting explosives in this area.
Hey, be careful with that equipment.
You're the ones who should be careful. It's stupid to use explosives underwater.
Who are you?
We're from Sealab.
You've no right to use explosives on Seamount. Who are you?
I'm Craig Bracken, submarine oil geologist. We have the right to do whatever we want.
You're trespassing, Mr. Bracken. Take your gear and get out of here.
We're not trespassing. I told you we have permission.
That's right, they have permission. When you hear that, what's the first question that comes to mind?
To do what?
No, that's not it.
Explore for oil. And it looks promising.
You mean you plan to drill underwater on Seamount?
That's not it either.
That's right, miss. Right where you're standing is going to be one large underwater oil field.
We're not gonna let you pollute this area.
I told you we have permission.
From whom?
That is the first question that comes to most people's minds, but it took him long enough to ask it. He may wish he hadn't, because the permission came from Paul.
Now, take it easy, Ed.
How come they're still looking for oil? We have atomic power.
There aren't enough reactors for all the world's needs. Oil still supplies 50% of our energy.
Atomic power was supposed to be our great savior as far as energy is concerned. But the troubles began almost immediately, and it's still an uphill battle to make sure it's safe. Truckloads of misinformation about it didn't help, and today most nuclear power is being phased out in favor of other renewable sources, at least in countries that put things like being able to breathe and drink clean water over profit. Needless to say, the U.S. is still in the dark ages on that score.
Now forget about oil. How about this energy? Look at the effect we're getting from the electric ray.
How can we forget about it, Dr. Williams? They said they found promising signs and are going to start drilling.
Paul seems remarkably unconcerned, even though a single small oil spill could destroy everything they've been working on all this time.
Oil companies do 1,000 explorations for every field they put into operation.
But Seamount isn't open to oil exploration.
That was yesterday.
You mean you knew about this?
Right. They got permission to explore. Now, I told you to forget it. They'll probably never sink a well on Seamount. The odds are against it.
Okay, what did they promise him? He doesn't think they're likely to find anything, but the fact that they're starting to drill suggests otherwise. This is out of character. We see the oil people setting up what could almost be a small city with their drilling equipment and all.
Ed, what does this mean?
Just what it says, Dr. Williams. It's my letter of resignation.
We're not going to accept it. You're too valuable, and we've spent too much time training you.
You can't walk out on Sealab.
Why not? You sold out, didn't you?
Ed, life consists of compromises.
Oh, don't start lecturing him about life. Life is what you're studying down here, and those guys are jeopardizing all of it. Their activity is stirring up the bottom, scaring all the sea life away, and destroying resources. He's right, Paul. Life is full of compromises, but this is a sellout. You really don't have a valid counterargument. And Ed is adamant he won't stay around to see the consequences of Paul's action. He and Bobby are out diving so he can say goodbye to some of his fish friends when Hal and Gail catch up to them. Gail has an idea. Find these guys a different place to drill. They shouldn't care where they get the oil from as long as they get it. What does our crew know about how to search for an underground oil pool?
And shock waves will travel faster through oil-bearing sand and shale than through plain rock.
So that was the reason for those explosions, to create shock waves.
Right. No doubt they had a boat on the surface and monitored the shocks with a seismic instrument.
Do I understand that only shallow explosions are necessary, Mr. Jones?
Mr. Jones is the guy with the mustache. The thing is, and this was probably wasted on the Saturday morning audience, but they did it anyway, his first name is Quincy. If you don't get that, you're probably not into jazz.
Right, Gail.
How could we read the results?
There are some portable seismographs in the storeroom.
Good, we'll get one.
This Quincy Jones plays seismic gear rather than a trumpet. We have to infer that, but it's easy enough.
We just received word from the earthquake station in Anchorage. Activity is starting in the Alaskan area.
Thanks, Greg. I'll report to the captain as soon as we get more information.
I wonder if that will be important. Our dive team is out with their own gear. Soon enough, they found a spot that's even more promising than Seamount. They report their findings to Mr. Bracken.
You must be kidding, Doc. Look at what we have going here. You're asking me to shut this down?
Yes, we are.
It would be too expensive.
Whatever it would cost to transfer your operation would be a small price to pay to ensure the safety of Sealab and all it stands for.
Unfortunately, I have to be with Mr. Bracken. Unless Paul is willing to cover the cost of moving all that, he simply can't afford it. And besides,
You've nothing to worry about. This oil field is foolproof against accidents. Nothing can happen.
I foresee trouble.
the quick way to take care of this is for Paul to rescind his permission right now and tell them to take off. But Paul has chosen to be an invertebrate today. Meanwhile, we learned the source of that seismic activity in Alaska. A volcano that was thought to be dormant just did a Mount St. Helens, and with great force both above and below the water.
What do you make of that, Quincy? A volcanic eruption can produce a tsunami or giant wave, but the thrust might not be in our direction. And if it were, that wave could contain the force of a dozen atomic bombs. Inform all stations that we're on standby alert.
Of course it's going to come their way. That's not the question. The question is, how much fun did John Stevenson have talking to himself?
Ed, I know how you feel. At least we tried.
Not hard enough.
Ed is right. Paul seems to think saying please should be all they need. Bracken disagrees, and Paul is having trouble grasping that. He still doesn't understand the permeating nature of greed, which is to say, he didn't learn a thing from the underwater dredging fiasco. They're getting everyone inside to ride out the shockwave. Paul realizes the oil guys probably don't know about this, so he'll head over to warn them.
Dr. Williams, you did your duty, and I thank you for your warning. But now I have things to do.
I wonder if he really believes me.
He can't tell from what Bracken said. Paul is having a bad day.
I better check the structures. The tsunami! Get back here! Nothing can happen! It's too heavy to move. Get help from Sealab.
But you said nothing can happen, so I assume this right here is all in your head. It's not really happening, yes? And that's not even the worst of it.
Mr. Bracken is trapped under the wreckage.
Okay. Get back to him with a reserve tank. Repair crew ready?
Repair crew ready.
Then move out.
The oil spill is drifting toward the kelp beds. If that goo hits, it'll play havoc with our whole environment down here.
Mr. Bracken said his stuff was foolproof, but it sure fooled him. The dive team has a plan to contain the oil.
But oil is lighter than water. Won't it rise to the surface?
Eventually, right now, the current is taking it toward us. All our years of work could be ruined.
Like I said, Dr. Williams, we didn't try hard enough.
And by we, he means you. I suspect Paul already knows that.
We'll get you out of there, Mr. Bracken.
Sorry, Doctor. Guess I overestimated my technology.
Don't worry about that now. I think we can stop the oil from spreading for a while.
They're catching the oil in that plastic cover. It's an oil balloon.
Naturally, the big question that will never come up is how much oil can it hold? While they're tying that down, Mr. Bracken says he has to stop the leak. But Paul isn't having it. Back to Sealab and the doctor for him. His leg is in pretty bad shape. He'll have to settle for telling them how to stop it.
A shock tore these wells open. A shock should close them.
Explosives again?
Yes. Shaped charges.
You mean explosives that direct their blast towards a specific spot?
Right.
That was a very nice explanation of what shaped charges are, and it felt pretty natural. It didn't feel shoehorned in. The idea is to plant the charges all around the hole and detonate them toward it. Basically, we're plugging the hole with mud and other debris, collapsing it in on itself. World-famous firefighter Red Adair used to use similar methods to snuff out oil fires sometimes. And using shaped charges is a lot safer than just grabbing a shovel.
Why don't we all get together and burn Ed's letter of resignation?
I'll supply the match.
Anyone have a cup of coffee to spare?
Mr. Bracken, I want to put you on notice that Sealab will fight reopening that oil field.
Where'd this come from? What happened to compromises and all that? When did Paul decide to start leading today?
Dr. Williams, so will I.
You will?
You told me there's oil on the other end of the Seamount.
But you said it would be too expensive to explore.
If it's far enough from Sealab so that harm would be minimized if there were an accident, that's where we'll go for our oil.
He's not telling the part where all his equipment was destroyed and he has to start over, so it doesn't matter where he does. Underwater oil drilling has been controversial from the beginning, and we saw why. Remember the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico? And that's just one. Leaks happen a lot. It's another good reason to start moving away from fossil fuels and into renewable sources. I know those have their own issues, but as far as I know, things like this don't happen on a solar farm. You don't need a big balloon to catch a sunlight spill. Speaking of which, what became of all the oil in that thing?
Number 2.
Oh, right, the explosions made it all disappear. That's a thing that happens. Look, just go with it, okay? Morning or audience. Paul has chosen. Good grief, David. He'll shoot. This is a lot. Schaefer? Really?